Hey folks, I'm International Master Kosti Kavitsky, and today I'll be continuing my series for Lichess YouTube channel on the classics. So in this video, I'll actually be covering three players who I think were really important in the development of what we would probably call as the Romantic era in chess. I personally consider the first two players that we looked at, Greco and Philidor, to be kind of like the pre-Romantic era. But these three guys, Evans, McDonnell, and Bourdonnais, that we're going to cover in this video, these guys really defined the Romantic era. And this was a period of chess where there was a lot of attacking play, sacrifices, gambit play. In general, players were always looking to play as aggressively as possible, trying out lots of different gambits in the opening, and basically just looking to checkmate their opponent in spectacular style. This era is also known to be a period where players were not that well versed in, let's say, defending their positions. A lot of these games you might analyze from the past look very spectacular on paper, but if you analyze them, you might uncover that, yes, there was many possible defenses. The sacrifices weren't always fully sound. The first player I wanted to talk about today was actually named Captain William Davies Evans. In fact, he was a sea captain, and back then chess players, chess was not their only profession, but they were musicians, artists, lawyers, doctors, captains, and so on. And as you might guess from his last name, he is the inventor of the so-called Evans Gambit. And this first game we're going to look at is his game against Alexander MacDonald from London 1829. This was one of the very earliest games that featured the Evans Gambit, which is of course this sacrifice starting with b4 in the well-known Italian game. So the point of this sacrifice is to put some pressure on black's pieces and force black to lose some time capturing this pawn. The main line has long been bishop takes b4 and continues to be the main line today. And white's idea here is to play c3, gaining a tempo for the eventual center expansion with d4. Of course, in previous games we saw Greco playing c3 followed by trying to advance d4 and getting a big center. Here, Evans's brilliant idea was to sacrifice a pawn in order to get this lead in development even faster. So in this game, McDonald captures the pawn, white plays c3, bishop c5. I believe this is not the most accurate move nowadays. I think bishop a5 is still pretty theoretical, as well bishop e7. But of course, this is 1829, so the theory was just starting to develop. Here white castles, black played knight f6. I think d6 was a little bit better, but again, the openings were not perfect back then. Knight f6, d4, takes, bishop b6, and now e5. So this is already showing why this gambit can be so dangerous for black, is that if they don't react in the proper way, they might already be just getting completely rolled over in the center. And I think this attack is already devastating for white. And the gambit, I mean, has just worked out perfectly. You know, the pawn that white gave up, the b pawn, it makes no difference to white whether they have this pawn or not. In fact, it might be even nicer that they don't have the pawn because the bishop is open to develop to a3. So here black tried the move d5. This is a pretty typical defensive resource for black when they're trying to claim a stake in the center while also counterattacking the bishop on c4. This is an idea that still comes up in many opening lines today. But here it's just not very good. White took on f6, black takes on c4, rook e1 check, king to f8. The natural move bishop e6 would run into d5, among other things, winning a full piece. So black goes king f8, white throws in bishop a3 check, king g8, black's king is just well on the run, and now d5, hitting the knight. Black played knight a5, bishop e7, queen d7, and now white goes f takes g7, and at this point white's attack is just completely crushing. The dark square bishop is just so powerful. King takes g7, and white's next move, queen d2, was particularly strong, threatening queen g5 check, threatening queen c3, and black's king is just in a world of trouble here. Black tried to defend with queen g4, and this ended up losing to a very nice combination. Queen c3 check, king g8, now white to play and win. Pause it if you'd like to think for a little bit longer here. Queen takes h8, very nice queen sacrifice, leading to forced checkmate after bishop f6, queen g7, and rook e8 mate. So Evans had a number of games that were quite spectacular, and he won in a nice attacking fashion. In this case against Alexander MacDonald, was actually the next player that we're going to talk about. So McDonnell is probably best known for his series of matches with the other player we're going to cover in this video, Louis de la Bourdonnais. These two players were very, very strong. MacDonald, originally from Ireland, Bourdonnais from France, and they basically played a series of 6 matches in the 1830s, I believe 1834. And these matches were kind of regarded as the first unofficial world champion. I mean, the players traded a lot of victories back and forth. The match was pretty bloody. In the end, Bourdonnais ended up winning the series of matches by scoring more points. In fact, the matches ended because both players kind of ran into health issues and had to stop the match. But the games that came from this match, I think, were incredibly exciting and well worth studying. The first game I wanted to show that probably is best well known to the public. We're actually going to be looking at this from Black's point of view. And this is really where the fun starts in the game. Here, Bourdonnais, playing black, goes for the move f5, really challenging White's knight on e4 and starting to gain a lot of space. This allows queen c4 check, which I'm pretty sure he was anticipating, king h8, and bishop a4, where White is now going to be winning material, but Black's pawns in the center end up being way too strong. So queen h6, bishop takes e8, Black takes the knight on e4, White's bishop on e8 is still hanging, but White decides to counterattack with c6. Black takes on f3, offering the bishop on b7. If White were to take on b7, this would actually lead to mate after queen e3 check, and f takes g2, with Black's rook coming into f2 and leading to quick mate. Instead, White played rook to c2, Black threw in queen e3 check, king h1, backs up the bishop, bishop d7, and f2. Now the f pawn is just really, really strong. Rook f1, d3. Now the d3 pawn starts running. Rook c3, bishop takes d7, takes, and e4. Now the third pawn starts supporting Black's incredibly strong passers here. White played queen c8, trying to make a queen of his own. Black goes bishop d8, no thank you. Queen c4. Now queen e1, basically the same idea. Of course, White cannot take the queen on account of the checkmate on the back rank. White plays rook c1 instead, and now d2. Very, very nice idea. Simply inviting White to capture Black's queen on e1. If White were to take, Black would simply take with the f-pawn here, promoting to a queen. Rook on f8 cannot be captured because of the pin along the first rank, and again, White's king is simply getting checkmated here. Instead, White played queen c5, hitting the rook on f8, and using the idea that both of White's rooks are still defended. Black played rook g8 here, rook to d1, trying to block the second pawn, and of course the third pawn starts running in with e3. At this point, White is completely lost. These pawns are just way, way too strong. But okay, he keeps fighting, queen c3, and already, I mean, the simple move e2 here would have been a very straightforward win, but the Romantic era was all about winning in the most beautiful style, the most beautiful fashion you can find. And Bourdonnais here, he does not disappoint. Queen takes d1, rook takes d1, and e2. This is where White ends up resigning in this position with Black's 3 pawns all lined up in a row on the second rank, and of course this is leading to a very quick checkmate in the future after f1 equals queen. This is truly an immortal position. I think it's been printed in tons and tons of chess books. I mean, just absolutely, you know, breathtaking. Just the 3 pawns dominating White's entire position, of course, and yeah, I believe this is one of the most famous games from the match. But McDonnell, of course, had his own share of brilliancies, and I want to share a couple of them with you guys right now. This first game, he is playing White against Bourdonnais. This all comes from the same series of matches. And here he utilizes the King's Gambit. Black accepts, knight f3, Black goes g5. This continues today to be one of the most critical attempts for Black to fight back against the King's Gambit. White goes bishop c4, focusing on development. Here Black plays g4, and McDonnell does something quite fascinating here and simply gives the knight on f3 with the move knight to c3. Now nowadays, if you're a King's Gambit player, you're probably very, very familiar with this type of sacrifice. This gambit of giving up the knight on f3 in exchange for quick development, it shows up in a lot of different positions. But according to my research, McDonald was actually the first player to utilize this type of sacrifice in the King's Gambit in this way. So we can basically consider him the inventor of this piece sacrifice that is now very thematic and very much a part of the King's Gambit theory nowadays. So he goes knight c3, and this was truly a brilliant game by him. G takes f3, queen takes f3. White has given up a full piece, but again has a very nice lead in development. And the position is surprisingly tricky for black to hold, even for modern players. I would say this is not an easy position to defend whatsoever. Of course, the engine can handle black's position, but there are so far no humans that can play perfect chess. Black tried bishop h6. I think this is probably not a great move, but okay, he's defending the pawn, so it's quite logical. White goes d4, just developing, taking space as normal. Knight c6, attacking this pawn, and of course white just continues in the same style, giving up the d4 pawn, just castling, getting the rook open along the f-file, and preparing the attack. Okay, black attacked the pawn, white did not defend it, so black ends up grabbing this pawn. And now already a move like queen h5 here I think would be quite strong for white, hitting f7. And then after knight e6, for example, white can go ahead and take the pawn on f4. Since after bishop takes f4, rook takes f4, the rook is of course untouchable due to mate on f7. So here I think white already has a very, very strong attack for the piece. The second rook is ready to jump in the game with the rook af1, and black just has no development to deal with white's attack. But MacDonald's solution is actually much stronger and pretty ingenious. Instead of queen h5, he starts with bishop takes f7, sacrificing a second piece for the attack. After king takes f7, queen h5 check, king g7, and bishop takes f4. White has essentially sacrificed two pieces, but again has a fantastic lead in development. Now the threat is bishop e5 check, among other things. So black kind of has to trade off the bishop. Rook takes f4. Now threatening rook f7 mate. Black goes knight f6, queen g5 check, king f7, and rook af1. Now I'm not exactly sure how far McDonnell calculated when he played bishop takes f7. Maybe he saw somewhere around this position. But to me it's very impressive because this is a position where white is two pieces down. But the knight on f6 is now going to be lost. So it's unclear to me how deeply he calculated this or whether he just felt like white's attack was very strong. But one way or the other, his idea was absolutely correct. And I think even for a modern player, they would be quite happy to play a game of this caliber. So black tries to run away with king e8, rook takes f6, queen e7, but the game simply doesn't last very long. Knight d5, queen c5, king h1, just getting out of the way. And black's king is simply just in way too much danger. Knight e6 was played, and here comes the final combination that wins the game for white. White just goes rook takes e6 check, with the idea being after d takes e6, knight f6 check. White is able to win the queen on c5 due to the discovered attack, and after that black's king is just quickly going to get mated anyway. In this position black of course resigned. So this was a fantastic game, and the last game I wanted to show for today actually comes from black's point of view again. This is one of those games where a brilliancy is kind of helped by the opponent. In this case, Bourdonnais it kind of forces McDonnell's hands here. He plays the move d6. So sacrificing a pawn in exchange for getting the d5 square. The position is already messy, but we won't get into it. By the way, if you want to check out the full version of this game, as well as some bonus games that I didn't cover in this video, do check out the link to the study on Lichess in the YouTube description below. And you'll see all of the games covered in this series so far with some of my annotations if you want to play through these games again, as well as seeing some bonus games that I didn't cover. So d6, black is forced to play c takes d6, white goes knight d5, mainly just fighting for the initiative, putting pressure on the pin, putting pressure on this knight on f6. But here black takes the opportunity to sacrifice his queen with knight takes d5. Really, really nice sacrifice, absolutely sound and correct. After bishop takes e7, black throws in knight e3 check. This is the key in-between move, king to e1, and simply king takes e7. So now to take stock, black has given up the queen for 2 minor pieces. Generally, this is not enough material, but in this case, black has so much positional compensation that it is absolutely worth it. Of course, this knight on e3 is the star in the position. Such a powerful piece, dominating white's entire position, not letting the king get to safety. Of course, the dark square bishop here is also pulling its weight, as well as the other bishop on g4. So here white goes queen to d3, and black simply defends the pawn with rook to d8. And this is kind of the hallmark of what we can call a positional sacrifice, when you can play the position without needing to generate threats on every move. Here black is simply playing the game as normal. Pawn was attacked, black is defending, not worrying about being down a queen, as the rest of black's pieces are simply overpowered. White played rook to d2. I should point out that, of course, black could have captured the rook on d1, but again, this is not about the simple material count. Knight is 3 points, rook is 5 points. Strong players, they are aware of these piece values, of course, but everything is subjective, and in this case, no strong attacking player would ever want to give up this powerful knight for white's passive rook on d1. So rook d2, black goes knight c6, white plays b3, defending the bishop. Bishop a5, pinning the rook, but not necessarily intending to capture the rook for the same reason. This bishop is just too strong. White played a3, rook a c8, rook to g1, defending the g-pawn, and now white goes b5. Pretty nice combination here. The point is, after bishop takes b5, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, knight to d4. Black is now attacking the bishop on b5, threatening a potential rook c1 check, as well as knight takes f3 check. White goes bishop c4, covering the c file. Now black takes on f3 and just wins the rook for free. This does allow white to go rook takes g7 check, but after king f6, rook f7 check, king g6, white's pieces simply aren't coordinated well enough to attack black's king with any sort of power. The queen is simply out of the game and dominated. White tries rook takes b7, but the game did not last much longer. Now black has won all of the material back and is actually material ahead, having a full 3 pieces, rook and 2 minors for the queen. Knight c4, bc4, rook takes c4, and black was able to win this game pretty cleanly, with the rook now activating itself on the second rank, and white's king eventually just getting in serious trouble. So that wraps it up for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The Romantic era is really one of the most amazing eras in all of chess history, with tons and tons of brilliancies. In the next video, we'll be continuing to look at some of the players from this era, and I hope to catch you then. Take care.